All right, welcome to Three Blondes, One Battle. How are you ladies today?
I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Hi.
Good. Oh, it looks nice and sunny in Terre Haute, Indiana. Look at
I
that.
know we were just talking about, the beautiful weather. So I came out here to do the podcast so everyone could feel the vibe of being fall and being warm and sunny.
Warm and sunny. Well, we thought we would come on here today and talk about finding purpose while you're managing the quote unquote new you. I think with, the diagnosis, maybe not at the beginning. It really didn't change much at the beginning for me. Did it for you guys?
Mm, I mean, it's so interesting. I feel like that is going to be I was so young, and you really, there's so many different things that you're navigating in your 20s.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it's just more just the abrupt confrontation of just like you're when you're that young, then it's like probably the first challenge you've really been through with health, for the most part. You think about that, like for anyone in their 20s, I just think, you're used to just being nothing, but you're just used to being healthy, and you really don't. Yeah,
You're invincible. Like there's
yeah.
nothing we can't do.
Yeah. So the reality that, your body is, not frail, but just you're not getting control of.
Right. The lack of like the diagnosis in general.
Yeah.
But I mean so like the shocking diagnosis for sure. But like as far as daily activities, did it even change? Did anything really change for you guys for the first, like, let's just say like the first, well, I know everybody's journey is different, but mine didn't change at all for, I would say, the first 7 years.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Uh, I would feel like mine was pretty drastic just because I was still active duty in the military and I had to get switched duty stations. Which during that time I was actually on leave back to the States. So I was stationed in Japan, just got done with deployment. And I was going to I went to a emergency room in Pennsylvania, but then I traveled cross country and went to two emergency rooms. And so I'm coordinating with my command. And thank goodness at this time, like I had Logan with me because Logan, we were both in the same command. So he was able to communicate a lot easier because I was dealing with so much health issues. Like I had really bad vertigo, which I was getting better, but and they thought I had a stroke the second emergency room I went to because I lost my smell and taste and I couldn't feel temperatures. So they thought I had a stroke. And that's how I went through MRIs and all that stuff. But during that time, too, because I was already back in the States just over a month. And I found out I was pregnant. So they were like, I couldn't go back overseas. And anyways, long story short, I was still dealing with all of my symptoms of the 5.5 months I was on deployment. And I really lost a lot of my mobility, like walking pretty well, like my strength. I had really bad time like staying awake because like I was on a lot of medication, and so I
Mm-hmm.
a lot with it. But for me, mine was drastic at the beginning. I would say probably the first 6, 7 months, just because I had so many changes, which I feel added with more stress because I'm like trying to coordinate like my stuff from Japan to where I'm at because I left everything there. And so mine was a little bit much, but once everything kind of got settled, it was like I could breathe again.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so being active duty, I could see that. Like that's like
Yeah.
a huge change. I think
Mm-hmm.
with Tara and I, so Tara, were you were working, you were an employee, right? Like I
Yeah,
was.
yeah. It was just
Yeah.
a farm. Yeah, I was working down in DC. Yeah, full-time job. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. That's how we met. Duh,
Yeah.
duh. Yeah, so we were both working in the DC metro area, like for employers. And I don't. I think the majority of people, well, I can't be positive. I don't isn't it around the 20s is typically when people are diagnosed? I know, oh, I hate when it does that.
No,
Um,
not necessarily. I mean, I think there's early on,
no.
I think, well, I mean, it might be changing now with,
Yeah.
medicine and just how we diagnose, but it was women in their 40s, to be honest
Oh,
with you.
wow.
But then they look back and they're like, oh, I probably have had this for 20
20.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Neurology.
But I think, early onset, I mean, I just think now with all the information out there and just, I think it's getting diagnosed earlier. And we can
Mhm.
actually, we'll have to follow up with that. Maybe I could do some research on that. Follow up with the
Yeah, I'm
podcast.
just
But
curious. I do feel like the majority of people that I know were diagnosed in their 20s. And so I don't, I'm just going based on my friend group. Um,
yeah, just being in that world, MS world, I just remember,
I feel
yeah,
like,
I think 20s you can get diagnosed, but I think the median average was 40s.
yeah,
wow.
And then it tails off after that, like after and as you get old, older, like 50, like it drops off for initial diagnosis, in 50s and 60s for sure. It's like your middle age years.
What are
yeah.
you going to say, Bobby?
Well, I was going to say when I was diagnosed, which I was 20, and my neurologist, I think he practiced like 40, almost 5 years, and I was within his last year. Um, Mind you, this is like civilian. This is who diagnosed me while I was back in the States. He was talking about how that I got very lucky with my diagnosis just because with my symptoms because they were so persistent because he was talking about how usually they don't um, diagnose until like 40s, like pretty much 40s, 50s. But he was also telling me you know, testing has been coming like a long ways with neurologists like through their conferences and like bringing like, okay, I'm getting more patients, I'm finding diagnosing them with MS. So I think the discussion around people being like MS is becoming pretty prevalent. But I feel like when I was diagnosed to now, especially the last 10 years, I feel like it like sped up helping people. But I know some people who are like in their 50s and they have like exact same symptoms, but their neurologist is like, no, you don't have it. And then they go to another one and they're like, well, you definitely have indicators of it. And they test them and they're like, oh, yes. But then it's like a battle with the insurance. Like, well, this doctor
Mhm.
this and well, this one's saying this. We don't know who to. We're going to send you another neurologist and see what they say. And
Mhm.
that's the hardest part is the.
Well, to Bobby, to that point, and just to add something to that, not that this is really kind of on topic, but a little off topic, but when I was in my 20s and being diagnosed, and I, what happens is like, I had optic neuritis, and I never, they were like, no, just probably related to, they don't know why. And then I got it again, and actually, I was going to Johns Hopkins at the time, and they were like, well, because you have to have obviously symptoms separated in time and space, and sometimes even the MRI isn't showing yet changes on your MRI, which show the demyelination occurring, but you have these early indicators. So people, might have different things that are kind of weird and off, but they're not attributing it to MS, or they're not, falling into what gives a diagnosis of MS. And so when I went to Johns Hopkins, I still had the two optic neuritis, two different times, separating time and space, but my MRI was still fine. My MRI didn't show much change. And so he's like, well, if you really, really are dying to know if you have MS, like he's like, the insurance thing too, right? Because that's going to change it just changes your trajectory of, having that diagnosis on you. That's not going away then at that time, especially with pre-existing conditions and healthcare at that time. But I was like, well, yeah, I don't want to, like, I have that just lingering. I'm not a gray area type of person. I'm like, I want to know, so then I had to get a spinal tap, he was gonna be willing to let me, like, if you don't, want the diagnosis, you don't have to get this. You could just keep on living your life. Which if I did do that and I didn't get the spinal tap, I would have just kept on living. And I don't think I had another symptom for another like 5 or 6 years.
Me
So,
too.
so I just think, I don't know. It's just, I think it's probably, a little bit, that was, over 20 years ago. But, like you were saying, Bobby, I think doctors have more information out there. There's constantly more research, I'm sure, more information on the different, how MS presents. So maybe neurologists are more in tune with, maybe going down that road, that pathway of diagnosis, or looking at MS. But I think it's just still variable whether or not a person gets that MS diagnosis.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I agree. But when it comes to like finding purpose, like kind of being forced out of what you've been doing, because let's say, I think with a lot of people, they find that if they're very stressed, or if their nervous system is on overdrive, that they find themselves having attacks and attack after attack after attack. And then they just think like, geez, I can't keep doing what I'm doing because it's just too much. I know for me, almost immediately, the surgeon that was in charge of me, he's like, you know what, you're going to telecommute from now on. And I was like, what's that? He's like, basically, you're going to work from home. I'm like, sweet. So, I mean, it just depends on your employer. Back in 2005, nobody was really telecommuting. I think these days there's more options. So as far as like having to change your entire trajectory, unless you're somebody on your feet, going, like, you're an UPS driver and you just got diagnosed, you're probably going to have to change your purpose and your job, because it could affect your legs. But I also think everybody's journey is different. So I remember wanting to go be a hairstylist, and my then dickbag husband says to me, you're gonna spend all that money on that and you might be in a wheelchair one day. I'm like, geez Louise. And so I think, thinking ahead, like, okay, would it be wise? I don't think you would say it like that to your spouse, because that's pretty crappy. But, thinking ahead, like, well, what if, I do have to, what if my mobility is limited? What else is there out there that I could do or that I enjoy doing?
Yeah. I think about just the different people that I've come across that have dealt with their diagnosis of MS and how they've processed it. I have one friend that had MS that chose never to have kids. And she really felt that, based on her diagnosis, that she didn't want to impact her MS in a negative way. She felt that having kids would have done that. And she's completely content and happy with her decision to not have kids. I mean, she did work. She was a teacher, but she chose not to have kids. And I think that was just a choice she made. But obviously, tons of people with MS have kids. I think it's so interesting on the personal journey people go through with a diagnosis like MS.
Yeah, the fear. Bobby and I were talking about that. I think I'm going to write a book about that, like just about parent and like having MS and managing as a single mom. But because I do think that it's the fear. You don't know, which is totally fine. But man, if I didn't have a child, I would be so much worse off, because it's almost like it forces you to get up. It gives you this innate drive to want to do. And then at the end of the day, sure, we might be like destroyed and totally tired, but look at it. We've raised another human. Like, and guess what? Now who's going to take care of it? Like, we have children that, the rest of our life, like, children bring so much joy. And so that kind of makes me sad that she was so fearful that she didn't want to have a child, but everybody's journey is different.
Yeah. And sometimes I don't know if it's prompted by fear. I don't know out of fear. I think it just was her level of comfort wanting to have her under, there could have been other factors too, but I don't know. When I talked to her, I don't know if this was all fear of what, like, not being able to, I just think she wanted, it was a personal choice for her own, like, level of energy and lifestyle that she wanted to, maintain for, her husband and doing things and wanted to work. I think, wanted to be a teacher, I don't know. Maybe you felt like you have so many buckets and that wasn't
I think that,
one.
I talk to like a lot of women, especially, there's a lot of young women that I talk to being diagnosed. And that's like one of the first things asked to me, like, how do you do it? Like, how did you decide if you wanted to become a mom? Like, I'm so scared because what if I make my MS worse? Like, what if I get pregnant and, things don't go well, whatnot, and I can't get up in the middle of the night or whatnot. And so when I share people my story that, I found out I was diagnosed with MS and found out I was pregnant. And I truly feel if it wasn't for my kids, I feel like my kids, like, yeah, we have really hard days, right? But I feel like my kids gave me got me uncomfortable and being okay with that. But it's taken time, right? But I feel when it comes to just general being a woman, like I was having a conversation with my sister, and she's like, I would always remember people saying, "Oh, childbirth so painful, like you're gonna absolutely hate it." And she's like, I just built this fear of like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared to go through childbirth. And so she has a little boy, and she's like, it was nothing like I envisioned what it would be like. And she's like, but for so long, like you hear people talk about it. So you hear people talk about living with MS, and that does affect you. It really does. And
yeah,
I never understood that until like 7 years into my journey. And I started to change my surroundings around that time. I started to put myself around people who were life, even though they didn't know what they were doing, right? I had similar stories like you guys. Like, who know? Like, it's just crazy. I've never met you guys in person, but here we are because of social media, But
Yeah.
I truly feel when it comes to finding your passion, you have to be willing to open that door of getting to yourself. Like I thought I knew myself. I had no idea who I was. Like, and now being in my 30s, I'm like, gosh, I feel like I'm just starting my life. Like I feel like my 20s I was going through like the ringer of life, right? And 30s, you're like, okay, like we're starting life now. I kind of got underneath of me, But I don't know. I feel like step of the way. I feel like in order to get there is just be a little bit more awake, a little more aware of your data. It doesn't happen over time, and when I do talk to people, they're like, "Oh, it's supposed to be like a snap of a finger, and then I just did it," but it could be years. Feeling take some action every single day. It's just a little bit. Like you're gonna figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a lot of things that you can do online these days. And finding jobs online, just
The world we live in now.
yeah, exactly. The options these days of being able to work at home are so much more than even 20 years ago. And so, if you're finding yourself in a spot where you're like, oh, I can't do what I'm doing anymore. Like I feel so useless now. Like, what am I gonna do?
right.
There are plenty of things. You just need to take a second, cry it out, be okay with quitting or whatever, and then move on to like trying to find online things that you can do because there's plenty.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Nikki.
I was talking to my husband about this, and I was like, when I was diagnosed in 2011 and going online, like what it's today is nothing like it was in the like early 2000s, right? Or even like 2010. And I'm like, it's just crazy how much we have come as a society. Like, can you imagine like 10 more years, like we're going to be at, like what online is going to turn into? Because it's not stopping,
Yeah.
But it just makes me excited just because, when I get people asking like, well, how did you start navigating? Like, what did you do? And I was like, well, social media, like it was there, but it's nothing like people talking about living with MS or chronic illness, autoimmune, whatever you want to call it. People didn't talk about it. It was just this, I had this, but people just didn't say anything until I feel like people started seeing like little bit here and there, people kind of talking about it. And then I feel it just kind of opened like floodgates, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice to share about things like on my social media. I love making people smile and laugh, and I do a lot of like comedy things. I just got back into it. Like this year's been a crazy year for me and my amount of stress and everything, but I'm back to like me. And I love making people like the lighter side of living with MS. Like, yeah, we put like a lot of stressful things that are hard to put into words. So it's kind of fun to make light of the situation. I got do that much, and it's just nice to, people share it. Like, thank you so much for this. This totally made my day. And it's little things like that we could do for each.
Yeah, definitely. I think that those of us that are veterans, though, also have it a little bit easier because we do have that monthly payment coming in from the government that is tax-free, and we'll get it till we die. And so if you're a veteran and you manage MS and you don't know what we're talking about, please get a hold of either Bobby or I privately, and we will help you, because that's a pool of money sitting there for veterans. And so I do think, to an extent, I feel a little guilty sometimes, because I do have that cushion, and I don't, as a single mom, if I was a single mom, not veteran, and on disability, there's no way I would have this house. There's no way my child would be going to a Christian school. Like there's just, and so sometimes I like compare myself to like people that aren't veterans managing MS, and I'm like, man, like that's tough, dude. And so for those that aren't, and they're like, well, now what? I was in a job making $100,000 a year. What am I going to do? I think in that sense, you kind of have to think like, okay, what makes you happy? Were you really happy in that job, or did you just
That's what I was going to bring up too. Like, yeah, it's not like maybe what the don't let the diagnosis of MS impact your dreaming. Like adjust, and maybe you do have to make adjustments to something that you feel, was a dream, but dream again or change and kind of go, I don't know, just find new purpose, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the same thing too. You are, let's say, like in your 50s, and you're not really tech savvy. I promise you, like you can
learn it. Yeah, absolutely.
Because there is a gal in my company, and she is in her 60s. Like we have people clear up in their 80s, and it's amazing the like recognition awards that they receive just because they're on their social media, they create some videos, they're relatable, and it's just amazing just to see people from all walks of life, of all ages, on social media, and just kind of having their own space too. But
yeah,
don't let well, I'm too old. Like I even told my grandma this. I'm like, Grandma, until you get like into your 90s, I will consider that you are old. And so she's gonna be turning 88, actually here in just like a week and a half. But she always laughs at me. But I'm like, truly, if you really look at it, Grandma, I'm like, you really not, like, you're still here, you're upbeat, like you love making people laugh. Like if you could figure out, like, because she can't really see very well, I'm like, if you could figure out how, if you could see, you could make so many people laugh all the time. And so when I hear people, I'm like, you're not old. What's saying that? Not old.
Yeah. And I think MLMs are a really great place to start, especially if you're finding yourself having to quit your job and you don't know, just look up multi-level marketing. There's so many companies out there, and everybody starts at the same spot. So I think, when something's taken away from you, you also have to kind of open your eyes to things that you don't know what they are at this point, but you can learn it. You can always learn things. And essentially MLMs are just products that you have to buy through companies, and then companies have affiliates. And so that you could become an affiliate for that company and they'll pay you to market their product. That's a really wise move. Now, if you don't love being on your phone, or you don't love being connected to a computer, that probably might not be the thing for you. What's funny is when I first got fired, no, let's see, when I first moved to Iowa, I was like, what am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do? I thought maybe I wanted to like teach. Have you guys ever heard of those, how you can teach like kids in Chinese? Yeah. So I actually looked into doing that. So that could be something for people out there, that they make pretty good money, but they work very weird hours because it's, China's different time zone. So that's something that you could look into. They pay pretty well.
There's I feel like anything that you could think of, more than likely there's some type of assistant. Like if you love creating, here's another idea. If you love creating things, especially when it comes to like designs, being on the computer, there are things as assistants like for people in like the digital world. Like you can make incredible money. Plus from like Pinterest. I love Pinterest. Okay.
I hate it.
Amazing. It's crazy. It's just do some digging. And I feel like the greatest place to do your research is getting on social media and looking up keywords and just watching videos, watching people, seeing how they're talking, what they're showing. Ask the questions. Just ask the questions. Then you'll figure it from there.
Yeah. Tara, how did you find your job?
Obviously I shifted and I do feel like it has kept me healthy. I was, worked, and then when I had kids, I stayed home with my kids, and my husband has a pretty demanding job. So I think that was a good fit, but I always attribute to ways that I was able to stay healthy and to manage my MS. But I obviously am working now. It's been a year and a half. I went back into the workforce. So huge transition. I mean, I think too, knowing that one of your choices that you might make, with MS, always evaluate, see how you're feeling, see how you're doing, and then, make adjustments from there. But I found my job. My manager now, who's my manager at CureScript, is my old, was my previous counterpart. Like I worked with her when I lived in DC as a pharmaceutical sales rep. So I had reached out to her, just like kind of trying to really talk about my resume and how to get back into the workforce. And I felt like it was a God thing, because then she's like, oh, this is what I do. I kind of, shifted to this, and I actually might have an opening. Are you interested? And it really was amazing, because I can work from home. But actually they shifted their policy. You guys mentioned like COVID and so many jobs now being remote. They went back into the office. So it's like I would never be able to be hired right now at that job anymore. They probably wouldn't hire me because their headquarters are in Orlando. So and I live in and there's still some other reps like me for Cigna Healthcare for CureScript that work remotely that got hired but I doubt I would get hired now. But I'm super thankful for that. Yeah. So I do feel like it is a good fit still, even though I'm working full time.
Oh.
Well,
that was weird. I just went out real quick. Working from home, I think is a good blend of working and then just my MS and my energy level and doing the kids. But yeah. So that's kind of how I got back into the workforce. But it was scary. I mean, for sure. And I still think I can sense the stress. I think it does impact my MS. I can tell difference working versus not working, or just being a full-time mom. There's definitely a difference.
I bet.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference. So
yeah.
I just yeah. I think
What'd you say, Bobby?
What'd
you say?
There's so many things that you can't control, like when it comes to work, like I have this deadline, or you have to answer calls and helping people, or whatever that you do. Like you can't take that break when you need to take that break, and I can't imagine. I could definitely seen that for myself, like with my MS, if that was for me, which I did for for a few months for a sheriff's department, and my boss, my sheriff, was so good. Like I could work from home, but there was times when cognitively I was just like depleted. I'm like, I can't focus at all, and I feel like that would be the hardest thing for me.
Yeah, and I also think that don't push through stuff like that. Yes, sometimes it's like, oh, poor me. Like this sucks. Like I shouldn't have to, stop doing what I've always been doing. But sometimes when it comes with this diagnosis, you just have to accept it, and it could take a while, but you just have to accept that things are going to be different, and your body, your nervous system is not the same as it used to be. And so if you're feeling a certain some way every single day that you go to work, and you're coming home and you're finding yourself, exhausted, and you're seeing things change a little bit month after month, and it's not for the better, the more you push, the more apt you are of having another MS attack. And so I just don't think I think it's worth pushing aside that ego. And I know it's easier said than done because, we're 20 years into it. But I do think looking back, that was key in kind of my journey and me staying somewhat healthy. I mean, I think I'm pretty dang healthy for 20 years in, but I think it's because I avoided, if something felt wrong and if I felt like I was pushing myself, I backed way the heck back. And I didn't care what people said about me or thought about me. I knew that if I pushed, I was going to have an MS attack. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I think we kind of really know ourselves, our thresholds, like whether you're early in the journey, if you continue, as you progress to the journey, I think you'll start to realize, like, more than maybe any other diagnosis, you really know, like, it really pushes you to be in tune with yourself, like your body. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not a failure, and you're not a quitter, and you're not, less than. It's just different. You're just pivoting, and you're figuring out as you go. And don't let people speak negative into you, or, just know that you're doing what you need to do for your body to take care of yourself and your family and your spouse, and don't care what the world around you says.
Agree.
Yeah. All right, ladies. Well, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Have a great week. Bye, and happy Thanksgiving for next week.
Yes.
Oh, yes, absolutely. All right. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Bye.